delighted to be sitting down with the founder of the Olwyn Foundation, feminist philanthropist Samantha Rowe-Beddoe. Olwyn was set up in 2018 with one simple guiding principle: the empowerment, education, and protection of women and girls around the world. Since its inception, Olwyn has campaigned across a range of areas, always adhering to one guiding principle that puts women and girls first, right in the centre. From FGM secession to changing the UK law to stop criminalising the victims of domestic abuse, from helping rehouse long-term homeless women to creating informed and accessible sex and healthy relationship education for young people. And if you visit the website, you'll see right there on the very first page the purpose of the foundation: empower, educate, and protect women and girls. So as I said, I am so delighted. I mean, Samantha Rowe-Beddoe, Sam, as I know you, I'm so thrilled to be sitting down at this table. We've known each other for a long time, but I have so many questions that I don't know about the Olwyn Foundation. But before we get there, Sam, tell me a bit about you and why the Olwyn Foundation.
So my background is education, theatre, drama therapy, working in sort of within community. And I realised quite early on the power of working in groups, the power of being able to rehearse and practice life situations, which the type of sort of therapeutic work we were doing enabled. So we're looking like how to manage situations of conflict, how to practice, how to rehearse life skills. And so for me, that's always been, it was so transformative to see young people who might not have had access to healthy, nurturing childhoods, to really good role modelling, and having that sort of attention being given to them, and actually being taught skills which often we take for granted.
But was that something you fell into, or was that something that you intentionally said, that's what I want to do?
No, I kind of fell into it. So I started with thinking that I did a theatre degree. So I never really wanted to perform particularly. I mean, I did love performing, but I realised quite early on that if you and I were in an audition together and you really wanted the part, I'd probably step aside for you.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I wasn't very good at pushing to the front on that level,
which you need to do in the theatre.
Which you really need to do in the theatre if you're gonna make it. So I trained. That's what I did. I did a theatre degree, but I moved into community theatre and education and realised seeing the impact on young people, looking at self-esteem, really practicing being somebody else, understanding. You don't need to be the shy person in the corner, that we can learn these skills if they're not innate. So I sort of began to understand the power of drama and thought it was something that everyone should access, which we can go into another conversation on that because we know that that's not necessarily available in the curriculum, but that it is something that is genuinely gives us potential, allows us to be somebody that we're not, and allows us to practice essential life skills, which, as I said, like I worked with young people who'd been excluded from school, who had no idea how to get back into school were in units, and people referral units, for having been excluded for something violent. And realising that they didn't have the skill set to get back into school and do an interview. They didn't understand that we need to make eye contact with one another, that if I turn my back and put my hood up on you, that you might be offended and might not think I'm serious, and that we had to practice those skills in order to assist those young people to get back into school. So I've always been really fascinated by the things that we need to learn, the things that we take for granted, that we've all learned, that we all know naturally, sort of being able to read, your cues and to be able to understand body language, and actually that I might be giving off really bad signals right now, and that you don't want me anywhere near your classroom in that particular situation. And realising that so many of the issues that we face societally come down to education, come down to access to knowledge, for example, if we're looking at, lovely introduction, by the way, thank you. But when we're looking at sex education and the resources that are available, when I was at school, I think it was the best contraception is the word no, was the the sex education resource that we had. That was it. And then I think we had to bring a baby through a birth canal to understand maybe how that worked. But, so if you're not given access to the education around, so specifically something like relationships and sexual health, sexual well-being, understanding what consent is, then you might not know because somebody might not tell you about it. It felt to me, with the underpinning of why I wanted to create Olwyn, was that access to education was really important for everybody. And as we know, there's a huge gender disparity globally. And then looking at what issues, what are the preventions, what prevents a young girl from going to school, be it cultural, economic, where you are in the world, geographic placement, etc. And looking at that and understanding that education is the key to everything, because that enables you then to have full autonomy, to be able to contribute to society. We know that if more girls went to school, there'd be greater polarity within the pay, the gender pay gap, but also there would be greater economic health and buoyancy if more young girls actually went through school. And so then with the Olwyn journey, it was looking at why don't girls go to school, which is where I got led to FGM, because that's obviously one of the first places that the rights of a girl are taken away from her, the rights over her own body, but also that's a stepping stone to being prevented to going to school.
It's really interesting that you say that, because recently I heard on a podcast that if you want to make change in society, you can't even go into secondary school. You've got to start with 6-year-olds. Yeah. You've got to start right at the very, very bottom, at the very beginning. And that's where change starts to filter through. But by the time a child is 8 years old, it's too late to really fundamentally create change within them and affect society. Yes, you can do that.
Well, I wouldn't say it's too late. I wouldn't say it's necessarily too late.
It's less effective.
But the earlier that we have the dialogue and the earlier that emotional literacy is on the table, and that we're able to distinguish and decipher between what our different emotions are, because that's a really interesting area. And for a long time, I worked with an educational project called Equal Voice, and that was about emotional literacy. And we were working with children as young as 3. Because often or not, someone will say, "How are you?" And you say, "Yeah, okay." Are we happy? Are we sad? Are we able to actually identify what our feelings are? So when we're trying to create a healthy sort of sexual, relationship, understanding and narrative, we need to be able to actually articulate what our feelings are. So that, I think, the earlier that is, and I do think there's progress on that actually. But yes, I mean, one of the projects that we've been working with, Tender, does workshops for young people in primary school, looking at relationships and looking at friendships and what is a healthy relationship. And the earlier you start, what we hope is that the earlier you start, then you have less problems down the line, so that we are ultimately reducing the figures on domestic violence. So it feels like education is it's the beginning of everything, and where we get our information from, which will then hopefully, if we're all committed, governments and, education boards and everything else, that we can then, detract from those figures.
So how did you go from having this passion and identifying the need to establishing the Olwyn Foundation? What was that process?
Well, it's quite a process. I mean, I was in a fortuitous position, so I was in a position to be able to do it. I had been working 2016, 2017 with organizations, large organizations that I had identified as being, potential partners or women that I wanted to be involved with, and with the work that they were doing. But they're big organizations like Women for Women International, which I have a huge, great deal of respect for. Also Save the Children, but some of the really big organizations, always with a very specific focus on girls and women. And as I went through that sort of, introduction to being involved in that charitable world, I realized that I wanted to do something a little bit different. I wanted to be more involved. I didn't want to just be giving a donation to an organization where I might not know necessarily where it was ending up, and that I wanted to be able to, design my own projects, or our own projects as it became. So it was a good 2-year learning curve prior to establishing Olwyn. And then since then, we've continued to go through that because we were still partnering up with large organizations. And it's really only in the last 2 or 3 years, and certainly now benchmark for moving forward, that we really want to work with grassroots organizations. We want to be able to, because we want to be involved and we want to be able to be responsive. So for example, the Global Media Campaign, which is the FGM cessation project that we're working with, our focus is specifically Sierra Leone, but they just came to us and said, it's cutting season.
So before we go any further, just for anyone who doesn't understand, what is it that you're talking about?
So I am talking about FGM, female genital mutilation, or it's also referred to as FGC, female genital cutting, which is a practice that takes place all over the world, but predominantly in African countries. It is seen as a cultural practice, which is considered to be a rite of passage between puberty and womanhood. In Sierra Leone, it is endemic in the culture. To be a part of the Bondu society is almost like being part of a sorority. It's like you join, and then when you have this cutting, which I can describe in more detail if you'd like, or leave it.
I think it's worth knowing what it is.
So it's the removal. So there are 4 types of FGM. The first is removing the clitoris. The second is removing the clitoris and the labia. The third is all of the above and then narrowing the vagina. And the fourth is all of the above and then extra bits like piercings and cuttings and things like that, excavations.
But hang on a second. If this practice is being taken place on young girls, that means that a young girl has absolutely no chance of orgasming, enjoying sex.
No, ever. No.
And these girls are how old?
So it really ranges in age. I mean, in Sierra Leone, it does tend to be as a sort of mark of transition. So it's around the age of 13. It can be, up until early womanhood, sort of, 18, 19, and even in some countries, it's much younger. It's sort of, cases the age of 5. It is considered to be it's an honor. You're joining, you've moved into this next transition. You are a more valuable bride. Because it goes hand in hand with, because you have no rights and because sex is not for women in these countries, sex is for men in these countries. And it means that you are somewhat revered. It means you're untouched. I suppose it's kind of like having a hymen check, and to a certain extent, it means that you're a virgin. The physical complications, this is not done, on a surgical table. This is, a young girl is pinned down, and it's often done with a rough knife and, some leaves are put on afterwards. There's no sort of There's nothing, sanitized about it. And the not only the physical, but obviously the psychological implications are unbelievable. I mean, there are deaths from this practice. There were a couple of deaths last year in Sierra Leone, which did get some publicity, because communities are trying to, some communities are trying to make change and to exchange this practice for another rite of passage, which the community can share. Because interesting enough, this practice is done by women on girls. So there's something very interesting about that. And there's nothing in any holy book that would suggest that this is something, that should be followed.
I just want to interject there before we go into more of what Olwyn does. I'm sort of a bit stuck with this, because a couple of quick questions. How frequent is this? How many women?
8 out of 10 women, girls in Sierra Leone. 8 out of 10.
Okay.
Which is really unbelievable. I think it's something like 200 million women and girls globally. And in Sierra Leone, it's particularly high. It's 8 out of 10. That's a statistic. And one girl gets a cut every 10 seconds. So how many while we've been sitting here? That's quite a scary thought.
And this is exclusive to countries like Sierra Leone. It doesn't happen in Europe.
Well, no, it does. Unfortunately, it happens in... It does happen. It's just medicalized. So places like Denmark and Germany, you can have the procedure can be done if you're, say, from Sierra Leone, or you're from Uganda, or you might take your child to see a Western doctor to have this done. I know often, but I know that I don't know if you've ever seen those posters in Heathrow Airport in the doors.
In the toilets.
Yeah, which is because girls get taken thinking that they're going to visit a cousin somewhere, and then that actually it was a FGM visit. So there is so much work being done. The Global Media Campaign, which is the campaign that Olwyn supports and is involved in, I think is extraordinary, because it's funding and educating young journalists and activists in country to put out on the airwaves and to educate their communities. And it has success. And there's a huge amount of passion behind it. And it's a really interesting initiative, because it's giving, journalists skills, further media skills, social media skills. Radio seems to be a really important medium there in order to really get to the communities, because it's communities then informing communities. So one community decides that they're not going to do it, then that's, potentially affects another community. But it's so endemic. It's a really difficult. It's not just going to go. There was a magic, 2030 will have eradicated FGM. Very unfortunately, we won't have done that. But any girl you can save, is my motto. And because any girl you can save can then go to school, because obviously you've got the physical, fallouts, which is, hemorrhaging and ultimately issues with childbirth and fistulas and, infection and then young girls not going to school. And then what also it does tend to go hand in hand with child marriage as well. So it's a really, it's a very murky.
And the reason I wanted you to just talk us through that is because I think so many times we think of these practices, these things happening far, far away from us, and not really understanding what they mean. Now, Sierra Leone is far away from us. It is culturally far away from us. But I've seen those posters on the back of the doors in Heathrow Airport. I was in Heathrow Airport recently and I saw them there. And the idea of a child being told that she's going to visit a relative in Denmark or Germany and then finding out that she's going to be mutilated for life is abhorrent.
Absolutely. I think those posters probably are referring, I think what you've got, just to clarify, is that would be a sort of, the child thinks they're going to, Uganda. for a holiday with family and aunties
absolutely.
and this, that, and the other. The practice in Denmark and Germany, etc., will be for communities from
Yes,
who are then in country, because the thing is, there is a westernized medical, so you could have it done safely, but why would you be going to have it done in the first place?
Exactly.
And this is the bottom line for me. Well, I don't know if it's the bottom line because there's so many lines on this, but they keep getting more and more, deeper and deeper. Is the fact that you never understand you have autonomy over your own body because you never have, because it's taken away from you before you even understand that you are solely in charge of yourself and you make decisions about your body and what you want to do with it and what you want to do, therefore, with your childhood, with your life, and I think that is just taken from you. And that, to me, that's where with Olwyn I sort of started quite far over there, and then this is where I came back. This is where I came back to is the beginning, because your autonomy is already gone.
Yeah. Where does the name Olwyn come from?
Olwen. Olwyn is my middle name. Olwyn is a Welsh name. It means white cloud. And it's actually she is a sort of Welsh goddess, who I think was married to a giant. Anyway, it's a big story. But wherever she walked, lilies grew. And so she's a symbol. She's a bit like Persephone. She's the sort of symbol between, the dark and the light, and winter and spring, so regeneration. So it just seemed a very fitting name.
I love it.
And nobody knows really. I don't normally say it's my middle name, but we were speaking about Wales earlier. So yeah, Olwyn.
I love that, and I'm glad that you put it in context there. Now, before we come to what the Olwyn Foundation does across all of these topics and how people can get involved, I want to just touch on one of the topics that you has been mentioned on the website and that I've just mentioned in the introduction, and that's the topic of domestic violence. Now, recently having more insight into domestic violence, this again horrifies me. And the statistics are that there was 2.9 million cases of domestic violence reported in the UK last year. Mm-hmm. And we know that that's what's been reported, that there's an awful lot more that weren't. We also know that 35.6% of the American population at one time in their life is going to experience domestic violence. And in Malta, it is 1 in 4 that will experience domestic violence, 1 in 3 that will experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime, which is all absolutely horrific and completely unacceptable. But one thing caught my attention, and that's where your description says changing the UK law to stop criminalising the victims of domestic abuse. And when I read that, it stopped me in my tracks, because working alongside and listening to stories of women who are experienced domestic abuse, have survived domestic violence, I'm failing to see why anyone would criminalise them. And so what is that? Stopping the criminalisation of the victims?
So this is an initiative through the Centre for Women's Justice, who are an extraordinary organisation set up by Harriet Wistridge. And they have been working on amending the domestic violence bill for the past, for years, but specifically on this piece of work for about 3 to 4 years. Now, Harriet represents women who are locked up for hurting their abusive husbands. So there are a number of kind of notorious or well-known cases where she has worked with and actually managed to get greater leniency on their sentences. But basically, it is that women who have endured years and years of abuse and then turn around and respond in some kind of physical way are then locked up for it. And so what she is trying to do is to change the way that the law looks at women who have been victims of domestic abuse, who are then, and how they're treated and how they're and what their sentences are, because there are so many women outside of these rather large cases. There are so many women who are in prison because they have to do X for their abusive partner. So they have to pick up the drugs, or they have to, they're shoplifting, they're doing something because they're being coerced into doing something, and then they end up with short sentences. So the whole penal system for women, it needs a complete and utter overhaul. But this is specifically looking at decriminalizing women who have endured years of domestic abuse. And also looking at, in fact, Olwyn made a film with Centre for Women's Justice, because the CPS, there's so much education that is required from the police, to the court, in terms of how women who are victims are treated. And it feels like that everything is out of alignment. A woman's phone is taken away from her. If she's, if she says that she's been raped, but there's any messages between them. I mean, it's just she becomes almost the perpetrator and loses victim status very quickly, which is why often women do not carry through with, any kind of proceedings, because they're treated, as if they're perpetrators. So it's a really interesting area. And Olwyn has funded salary for the Centre for Women's Justice for the past, I think we've moved into our 4th year, because it is such it's the end, it's the other end of this. I suppose for us, for Olwyn, it's like a narrative that we have, in terms of where we've decided that we want to put our resources. So we have our, healthy sex education resources and programs. Then we're looking at FGM. We're looking at, supporting victims of domestic violence. I mean, the piece that we did with Solace on homelessness is really interesting. Women who are so difficult to access and nobody wants to help and support. And then coming to advocacy. So we're hoping that we have some kind of balance there in what we're trying to achieve. But it's a really interesting and rather depressing area around female prisoners and what they're being imprisoned for, and that they're being taken away from their families and their children, so the repercussions on their children. Again, it's sort of so ill considered, because the ramifications then on the family and the sort of
having spoken to domestic violence survivors and discussing what prevents them from leaving, is exactly that. It is that it is assumed that they are in the wrong and they have to prove themselves to be in the right. So they are immediately on the back foot and at disadvantage. And that stops an awful lot of women and men from coming forward and, one, moving out of that situation, but also seeking justice for what they've had to tolerate.
Which again, sorry to keep hopping back on the old education, but it comes down like everybody, the whole, the penal system, the courts, the police. We have to reframe the way that women are treated. We have to, and that needs to come through every level. So if we start by, we respect girls when we're 5, and we go all the way through, then, we'd hope that the outcomes would be very, very different. I know that's really super simple, but it feels like there's just such shortfall in, education around women, how women are dealt with in horrendous situations. I mean, we can go on. I mean, the poor refugees who've come in from, Afghanistan into the UK and many other countries, who are tortured and traumatized and have fled their countries, are being put into, housing facilities where they're having to share, 5, 6 to a room, and often with men that they don't know. I mean, it's like, in what way is that a loving, warm embrace, when you've gone through this horrendous journey and then you're, subjected to that kind of environment?
It was once explained to me why there are so many more men that migrate from South from sub-Saharan Africa than women. And it's not just to do with the physical journey, but as women cross the Sahara from sub-Saharan Africa to the North Africa, the chances of them being raped and or killed is absolutely horrific. And then to arrive in a country, when you've fled a country, gone through all of that abuse and risking your life, and then to be treated
and to be essentially locked up. I mean, they're locked up. It's
I want to, you mentioned there about sex education. So before we come to exactly what the Olwyn Foundation is doing and how we can support the Olwyn Foundation, I just want to touch on this sex education, because it occurred to me recently that society has changed, and society has changed dramatically since I was 15 years old, 35 years ago. Society has changed in the way that we communicate, the way that we perceive each other, the way we communicate with each other, the way that we address so many topics. But sex education is pretty much the same as it was 35 years ago, from what I can understand. There's not been a lot of advancement in empowering women and young men to how sex education should be viewed, how it should be regarded, and the messages that are being given. And understanding that a lot of sex education now doesn't come from school, it doesn't come from parents, it comes from what's online. That might be social media, it might be pornography, it might be that it comes from your friends. We have a huge absence, and we're seeing repercussions. Olwyn is involved and passionate to work with sex education for young women and girls. Tell me about that, because this seems to me like so essential.
Well, it's the project that we've been supporting. Well, the one I mentioned, Tender, which is for young people. That's physical workshops using drama, which was like I was saying in the beginning, which is something that really resonates with me and I know works well. But Fumble's really interesting. Fumble is an online resource which is for young people, not just girls, because obviously we want to educate our boys.
Yeah, absolutely.
We really need to educate our boys. Caregivers, parents, and educators. So it is it is about sexual health, but it's also about mental health. And it's a resource that's really grown in, the last 3 years. And I think should just, it's available, it's online, it's accessible. You just need to be pointed in the direction. So you can ask your sort of questions, and there were the things that, the icky things that nobody really wants to talk about, to the more serious things about your own personal sexuality and decisions that you're making, but also really specifically around the areas of consent and understanding what that is. Because that seems to be still murky water. And with the other resources like on, porn, if that's your resource, then you might be quite, have quite a misunderstanding about what consent is and what a healthy sex life looks like, or just a sex act looks like, because there's just so much. There's so much sort of misinformation.
Absolutely.
So it's something I feel, I'm really excited about. I mean, there's a wonderful quote on our website, which we've just redone, from Lucy, who's the CEO of Fumble. And she says, we were a fledgling organisation and we're really now thriving. And I think that's what Olwyn, where we want to be. We want to identify, fledgling organisations that have the potential to make real change and take them on that journey. And I think that's where we are transitioning, because we started with slightly larger organizations, and now we're realizing that actually we can do, and we need to do, and it resonates with us, these smaller, sort of more, grassroots, if you like, organizations that can be responsive immediately, is what we want to be a part of. And we want to invite other people to, other women, but we're not excluding men from this by any stretch of the imagination. But we've got this idea of a sort of, that we want to create a sort of a community, a sisterhood of women and, their friends and their daughters. So we've got a nice range of ages as well. Really, participating with their ideas, with with sort of energy, with a friend of a friend has a restaurant and we could do this there, so that we can create this sense of community, identify the projects that resonate with us. And we have got we've done our due diligence. We understand, the partners that we've worked with over all these years. We've learned a lot. And so, we're trying to we're just moving into this, this next phase, which is really exciting, because I think that post-COVID, there still is a sense of lack of community, and we all want to be a part of something. And I know we've all got our friendship groups and, et cetera, but there's something more. There's something that feels like it's lacking. And I think that where we are transitioning into, where Olwyn is transitioning into, is this idea of being a bridge, where we are, the bridge between the sort of brokenhearted, where those of us who sit and we listen to the news and we feel so desperate about what we're hearing, and yet it's too big, I can't do anything. Yeah. It's making me, it's not on my doorstep. And so I feel really sad about it, but now I'm going to have a coffee and get on. To actually feeling like, yes, we need you. You can make a change, and that change to one person's life will have intergenerational outcomes, because you change the girl, that one girl who doesn't get cut, and she goes to school, and then she has a profession, and then she may or may not meet someone, and she may or may not have a child, but if she does, the way that she will bring up. And those stories, they resonate with us, they feel manageable, as opposed to what is going on in Afghanistan. I mean, if I would be paralyzed, the fact that those girls no longer have a voice, are not allowed to sing, and cannot go to school. I mean, it is so heartbreaking, and it feels it's over there. That's not going to happen to our girls, And it's like, no, this is all girls. This is all of us, which is why I'm really interested in sort of engaging with my daughter is a young ambassador and her friends, and really trying to get this sense of community. We're small, we're small, but we're quite mighty. But we're very much inviting people to be a part of the Olwyn movement, if you like, and just to feel that, share that,
I think two things there. First of all, no one can ever underestimate the effect of changing one person's life.
No.
Because you change one person's life, you empower one person. It could be through something you do or something you say, or somehow you support them. Yeah. You support that one person. That person then has a ripple effect in that they are empowered. Therefore, they're going on to empower other women, children, girls, boys, could be anybody. Mm-hmm. But that ripple effect, and I think, as you rightly said, so often we think that we're completely powerless, but change one person's life and you've actually probably changed hundreds in one way or another. Coming to Olwyn and putting that in context of Olwyn, and I want to support these incredible causes, Sam. What can I do? What can I give? And what does that look like?
Okay, so you can go online and you can go and you can donate directly online, either a one-off or a monthly, which would be fantastic. You can also get involved with us by offering up skills. So if you have a specific, like you, social media, we'd very much like you to be a part. And if you have any ideas or you have people that you think would be interested in being involved with Olwyn, then we'd love to expand that community of sort of like-minded individuals who really want to be involved. So we're looking at a broad spectrum of skills there. We are starting to do small sort of gatherings where we will be able to directly connect you to one of our partners, because I think that's the thing that's missing with these larger organizations is you never get to meet the heart of. So for example, Harriet will come and talk about the work she's doing at the Centre for Women's Justice. So you have an opportunity to meet our lead partners, and to learn more about their work directly from them, and then be involved in supporting their initiatives. So we are a bridge. We're looking to be a bridge between those who don't quite know how to access, but would really like to access. And that can also mean developing new projects. I mean, we're not, if you had an idea and you thought, there's this specific piece of work that I think would really work in, here or there, that's something that we can also, because we've done all the due diligence and because we have a really wide partner base, that we could, connect that up. So it's a really exciting time for us. We're really, and we're getting a lot of really good feedback because people do want to be involved, and it isn't just financial. We are offering, like, we have young people who are, doing things for us, and then that's something for their CV, and they're a part. So there's a whole range of, of openings and avenues to be involved.
I love that, and I love the idea of actually it being more than just giving a couple of euros or a couple of pounds, but you can actually get involved and you can meet the people that are making change on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely.
I absolutely love that, because as you said, quite often we donate, we give to a charity, we don't know what happens to that money. And for the skeptical among us, they kind of think, well, maybe that's going to go into an admin fee and maybe it's going to get absorbed somewhere else. But if you have the opportunity to meet those people making change, then you actually be able to see where your support is going. What do you want Sam Rowe-Beddoe to be the lasting legacy of the Olwyn Foundation?
I really want it to be a community, and I don't want it to be just a financial only, contribution. I mean, fabulous if that's what you want to do, but I want to create something more personal and more significant than that. We are looking for ideas, energy, enthusiasm, support on so many levels, so that we can really develop Olwyn and permeate into people's consciousness. So we are looking for a diverse skill base. We are looking for people who can do social media. We are looking for legal support. We are looking for people who just have ideas and energy and want to do a marathon. We are looking for all contributions, so that we can really create this sense of community, and that Olwyn is a bond, and that people feel that they own it and that they are part of it. That's what we're trying to achieve.